The snow fell on the city in the hushed, determined way it does on Christmas Eve, turning the frantic world soft and slow. In a warm, lamplit kitchen, Catherine stood staring into the open door of her refrigerator, but she wasn't seeing the food. Her eyes were glazed with a quiet panic. In 24 hours, her grown children, Michael and Chloe, would be home for their first Christmas dinner in 3 years. The table would be set, the lights would twinkle, and her husband William would carve the turkey with his usual solemn ceremony. Everything was prepared for a perfect picture, and that was the very heart of the problem. Because their family, like most, was no longer a perfect picture. It was a collection of adults now, carrying unspoken debts and recent scars. Michael's voice on the phone had been careful, polite, holding something back. Chloe's texts were bright, with too many exclamation points, a sure sign she was nervous. William had been sanding the same patch of banister for an hour, a man preparing for a silent storm. This dinner, Catherine feared, was not a reunion. It was a performance, and she had no idea if any of them remembered their lines, or if the old script would even work anymore. The ghost at this feast wouldn't be in the stories of Christmases past, but in the thick, unsaid things hanging between them in the present. She closed the fridge door and took a deep breath. She wasn't just cooking a meal. She was building a bridge, and she prayed it would hold. The morning of Christmas Day dawned brittle and bright. William was already in the garage, pretending to organize tools, when Catherine found him. "They'll be here by 4, she said, her voice cutting through the cold air. He nodded, wiping a perfectly clean wrench. "The roads are clear. She'll be fine." Their exchange was a dance of mundane details, a way to avoid the elephant that had taken up residence in their lives. Michael's failed business venture, which had quietly collapsed in the spring, and the substantial loan from his parents he could not yet repay. It was the great unspoken, a shadow that had lengthened over every phone call. Chloe, their vibrant, outspoken daughter, was in the middle of a divorce she refused to discuss, wrapping her pain in a blanket of frantic cheer. Catherine watched William's back, the familiar slope of his shoulders, and felt a surge of love mixed with frustration. He wanted to fix things, to make pronouncements and solutions, but this was a tangle that couldn't be fixed with a tool from his bench. By mid-afternoon, the house smelled of pine, roasting turkey, and cinnamon. Catherine moved through her rituals, polishing glasses that were already spotless, arranging crackers she would later rearrange. She jumped when the doorbell rang, an hour early. It was Chloe, her face pale, but breaking into a wide smile, her arms laden with brightly wrapped packages. "Surprise! I couldn't wait another minute," she announced, her voice a little too loud. Behind her, a taxi was pulling away. No husband. The absence was a physical thing in the doorway. Catherine hugged her tightly, feeling the slight tremble in her daughter's frame. "Where's Mark?" William asked, coming up behind them, his tone carefully neutral. Chloe's smile didn't falter. "Oh, family stuff on his end. He sent his love." She breezed past them, heading for the kitchen. "Something smells amazing. What can I do?" Catherine and William shared a look over her head. The performance had begun. Michael arrived precisely at 4, looking older, wearier than his 32 years. He carried a single, modest gift and a bottle of inexpensive wine. His hug with his father was stiff, a clap on the back that spoke of masculine awkwardness. With his mother, he held on a second longer. "Hey, Mom," he murmured into her hair. "House looks great." The evening's first cocktail hour was a minefield of cheerful small talk. Chloe dominated, talking about a new fitness class, a funny thing a coworker said, the traffic on the drive over. Michael sat quietly in his father's armchair, nodding, sipping his drink slowly. William tried to engage him about the car, about the news, but the answers were monosyllabic. Catherine flitted between them, refilling bowls of nuts that didn't need refilling. She saw Michael's eyes drift to the framed photos on the mantel. Him as a confident teenager holding a trophy, Chloe in her wedding dress, beaming. She saw his jaw tighten before he looked away. It was during the appetizers, a beautiful baked brie that nobody seemed to taste, that the first crack appeared. William, trying to fill a silence, mentioned a friend's son who had just sold his tech startup. Made a killing. Smart kid, always had a good head for numbers. He meant it as simple conversation, but the words landed in the quiet room like stones. Michael's head snapped up. Good for him, he said, his voice flat. Must be nice. Chloe shot him a warning look. Michael, she said lightly. What? I'm happy for the guy. Really. It's a great story. He pushed his plate away, the cheese congealing. Catherine's heart hammered. William, could you check the turkey? She asked quickly. As he left, the tension remained thick and sour. Chloe reached over and squeezed Michael's hand under the table. He didn't pull away, but he didn't look at her either. They were, Catherine realized, not just her children, but two wounded soldiers guarding their own hurts while silently acknowledging the others. The dinner hadn't even properly started, and the bridge she was trying to build already felt perilously fragile. The main course was served with a kind of military precision by Catherine, a campaign against the growing silence. The turkey was golden, the potatoes creamy, the honey-glazed carrots gleaming. They took their places at the table, the old family dining set that had seen 1,000 meals, its scratches, and watermarks a map of their history. William began to carve, the rhythmic scraping of knife on bone the only sound. So, Chloe, William began, laying slices of white meat on her plate. How's the apartment hunting going? It was a safe question, he thought. Chloe froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her eyes darted to her mother, then back to her plate. It's fine. Looking at a few places. Her breezy tone was gone. Michael watched her, his own troubles momentarily forgotten. I thought you and Mark were going to wait until spring to sell the house, he said, genuinely confused. A terrible, transparent silence followed. Chloe's face crumpled for a single, unguarded second before she rebuilt her smile. It was a terrifyingly swift transformation. Change of plans, she said, her voice small. The house had sold. I've been in a hotel for 2 weeks. The confession hung in the air, sharp and cold. Catherine felt the news like a physical blow. Her daughter, homeless for 2 weeks, and she hadn't known. William stopped carving, the knife poised in the air. Chloe, why didn't you say anything? He asked, his voice a mixture of hurt and concern. We have plenty of room. You could have come here. That was the wrong thing to say. Chloe's composure broke. Come here, she repeated, a brittle laugh escaping her. Back to my childhood room? No, thank you. I'm not a charity case. I'm dealing with it. The word charity echoed, and Michael flinched as if struck. He pushed his chair back, the legs screeching on the floor. I need some air, he muttered, and before anyone could respond, he was striding out of the dining room. They heard the back door slam. The perfect dinner was in ruins. William looked helplessly from his wife to his daughter. Catherine reached for Chloe's hand. Sweetheart, we just want to help. You shouldn't have to be in a hotel, especially not now. Chloe's eyes filled with angry tears. Help? How, Mom? By pretending everything's okay? By having this picture-perfect Christmas like the last 3 years didn't happen? Like my marriage isn't over? Like Michael isn't drowning? She wiped her face with a napkin, smearing her mascara. I couldn't tell you because I knew it would be like this. The sad looks, the hushed voices. I can't handle your pity on top of everything else. In the kitchen, they could see the faint red glow of Michael's cigarette through the window, a tiny beacon of distress in the dark. Catherine stood up. The time for performance was over. William, sit with Chloe. I'll be right back. She didn't go to the kitchen. Instead, she walked to the living room, to the old stereo cabinet. She bypassed the streaming Christmas playlists and found a dusty CD case. A moment later, the opening, slightly cheesy synthesizer chords of The Power of Love by Huey Lewis and The News filled the house. It was the song that played at their wedding reception, the song they had danced to in this very living room, young and ridiculous and in love. William's head snapped up. A slow, bewildered smile touched his lips. Chloe stared confused. Catherine then, walked to the back door and opened it. The cold rushed in. Michael stood on the step, shivering without his coat. "Get in here," she said not unkindly. "Your father and are going to dance. And you two are going to watch, and you're going to remember something." Bewildered, Michael followed her inside. William was already standing, a boyish embarrassment on his face. "Catherine, really?" he mumbled. But she walked into his arms, and as the song's driving beat kicked in, they began to shuffle. It wasn't elegant. William stepped on her toe. Catherine laughed, a real, unguarded sound they hadn't heard all night. They swayed and turned two 50-something people in a quiet rebellion against the sadness in the room. They were dancing to their song, in their home, with their children watching. It was an act of pure, defiant memory. Chloe's angry tears stopped. A real smile, small and wobbly, appeared. Michael leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms, but the hard set of his jaw had softened. The song was a time machine. For 3 minutes, the unspoken things receded, pushed back by the sheer, stubborn force of shared past, by the sight of their parents being not just parents, but a man and a woman who had chosen each other through worse than this. When the song ended, Catherine was breathless, her cheeks pink. William kept his arm around her waist. The silence now was different, not empty but full. "Okay," Catherine said, looking at her children. "The turkey's getting cold, and we're going to eat it, and we're going to talk. Not the pretend talk, the real talk. But first we eat." It wasn't a request. It was the gentle, unshakable command of a mother reclaiming her family. Slowly, they returned to the table. The food was lukewarm, but nobody cared. They began to eat, the simple act of sharing a meal, now feeling like the first true, honest thing they had done together in a very long time. The bridge, though shaky, was still standing. The conversation that followed the dance was not a floodgate opening, but a slow, careful thaw. They ate the cooling turkey and potatoes, the food now secondary to the tentative new space between them. William cleared his throat. "Chloe," he said, his voice softer now, "the guest room is yours for as long as you need. Not as a charity case. As our daughter. It has its own bathroom. Think of it as a transitional apartment with fantastic chefs." He attempted a small smile. Chloe, picking at her carrots, nodded without looking up. "Thanks, Dad. I might take you up on that. Just for a little while. The hotel is depressing." It was a surrender, but a peaceful one. This small honesty created a crack of light. Michael, emboldened or perhaps just tired of carrying the weight alone, spoke into the space. "The loan," he said abruptly. The word was out, stark and ugly on the beautiful tablecloth. "I haven't forgotten. I will pay you back. Every cent." William put down his fork. "Michael, we didn't give you that money as a loan. Not really. We gave it to you as an investment in your dream. Sometimes investments don't work out." It was a speech he'd rehearsed in his head 100 times, but saying it aloud made it real. "But it was a loan," Michael insisted, his voice thick with shame. "On paper, in my head, it's a debt, and I feel it every day." Catherine listened, her heart aching for her son's proud, wounded spirit. This was the knot that had bound him in silence. "Tell us," Catherine said gently. "Not the business plan. Tell us what happened. To you." Michael looked at his parents, then at his sister. Chloe gave him a slight, encouraging nod. And so, over slices of pie that no one had room for, but everyone welcomed as a distraction, he began to talk. He spoke of the long, grinding months before the collapse, the slow dread of watching the numbers refuse to climb, the awful day he had to let his 2 employees go. He talked about the silence of his empty office, the shame of updating his LinkedIn profile, the soul-crushing job interviews where he felt like a fossil. He didn't cry, but his voice grew hoarse with the effort of confession. "I feel like I let everyone down," he finished, staring at his half-eaten slice of pumpkin pie. "You, my friend, myself." William listened, his earlier need to fix things quieted by the simple act of hearing. When Michael was done, William spoke slowly. "You know, I lost my father's entire investment in a landscaping idea I had when I was 28. He never saw it as a loss. He saw it as the cost of my education. I've carried that lesson with me. This, he said, gesturing vaguely around, this house, our life, wasn't built on a straight line of success. It was built on trying and sometimes failing and getting up. It was the most personal thing William had shared in years. Michael looked at his father, really looked at him, not as a bank or a critic, but as a man who had also stumbled. The dynamic in the room shifted imperceptibly. The parent-child hierarchy flattened, just a little, into something more like fellow adults. Chloe, seeing her brother's raw honesty, found her own walls crumbling. Mark left, she said, the words simple and devastating. He found someone else. Someone less complicated, he said. She gave a wet sniff. I am complicated and angry, and I hate the person I became, trying to be uncomplicated for him. She spoke of the quiet agony of a marriage dissolving not in fights, but in indifference, of the eerie emptiness of the house they had once filled with plans. Catherine moved her chair closer and put an arm around her daughter, not saying a word, just holding her as she cried the tears she'd been storing up for months. Michael reached over and put his hand on her shoulder, a silent pact of solidarity between the walking wounded. The table was a mess of dirty plates and crumpled napkins. The candle had burned low, but the atmosphere was clearer, lighter, as if a fog had lifted. The problems weren't solved. Michael was still in debt and unemployed. Chloe was still heartbroken and homeless, but they were no longer secrets. They were share burdens. William stood and started quietly clearing the plates. Michael stood too. I'll help. In the kitchen, they worked side by side, scraping food into the bin, stacking the dishwasher. No profound words were exchanged, just the simple, healing language of shared labor. In the dining room, Chloe rested her head on her mother's shoulder. I'm so tired, Mom, she whispered. I know, my love, Catherine whispered back, stroking her hair. I know. For the first time that evening, it felt like Christmas. Not the Hallmark version, but the real one, a family, weary and flawed, finding their way back to each other in the dark. Not because everything was perfect, but because it wasn't. The practicalities, once the emotions had been aired, became a strange sort of comfort. With the kitchen cleaned and the leftovers stored, they migrated back to the living room, the fire now just embers. It was Chloe who broke the new, comfortable silence. So, Michael, she began, tucking her feet under her on the couch. What are you actually good at? I mean, besides losing Dad's money. It was the first real joke of the night, edged with the dark humor that only siblings who have just bared their souls can share. Michael threw a cushion at her, but he smiled, a real one that reached his eyes. Shut up, he said without heat. He thought for a moment. I'm good at the logistics, the organizing, the boring spreadsheets. I just wasn't good at the big visionary stuff. William, sipping a small whiskey, nodded. That's a valuable skill. Boring keeps the lights on. An idea, tentative and unformed, began to stir in Catherine's mind, but she kept it to herself for now. Instead, she focused on Chloe. And you, my complicated girl. What do you want? Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want? Chloe stared into the embers. I want to feel like a victim. I want to be angry, and then I want to be done with it. I want a place that's just mine, where I can buy ugly art if I want to. It was a start. They talked then, not in declarations, but in meandering thoughts. Michael admitted he'd been looking at project management certifications. Chloe confessed she'd been secretly looking at studio apartments downtown, but was terrified of the rent. It was William who made the first concrete move. He set his glass down with a soft thud. Michael, the loan, considered a write-off, a business expense for our family. Your mother and I've talked about this. We're not rich, but we're secure. Carrying that debt is poisoning you. Let go. He held up a hand as Michael started to protest. Hear me out. If you ever get back on your feet in a big way, you can take us on a fancy vacation. But for now, the books are cleared. The finality in his voice brooked no argument. Michael's eyes shone with unshed tears of relief. The invisible chain that had been cinched around his chest for months loosened just a little. Thank you, he managed to say, his voice rough. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the forgiveness, the unconditional belief. Catherine saw her opening. Chloe, the guest room is yours. But not as a guest. As a tenant. You'll pay us rent. Chloe looked startled. Mom, I just said I can't afford $100 a month, Catherine interjected smoothly. And you're in charge of your own groceries and keeping the space clean. It's a symbolic rent. But it's important. You're not a charity case. You're a woman in transition, renting a lovely room from her parents while she gets her bearings. The psychological genius of the plan settled over Chloe. It gave her dignity. It gave her autonomy. It was a hand up, not a handout. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. I could do $100. I can even do $150. The mood in the room had transformed from one of tense reunion to something like a war council, a family strategizing for the future. They were a team again. Michael, fired up by his newfound freedom from debt, started brainstorming aloud about online courses he could take, leveraging his failed business experience into a consultancy for small startups. Chloe, with the security of a safe landing pad, began talking about looking for a promotion at her graphic design firm, something she'd been too emotionally depleted to pursue. William and Catherine sat back, listening, interjecting with the occasional piece of hard-won wisdom or a practical contact. They were no longer just parents fixing things. They were elder members of a consortium. As midnight approached, the conversation wound down into a contented, tired silence. The Christmas tree lights twinkled, reflecting in the dark window. Chloe, curled in an armchair, spoke softly into the quiet. This wasn't the Christmas I thought we'd have. Michael, stretched out on the rug near the hearth, grunted in agreement. No, it was better. And it was the perfect, silent dinner they had all feared would have been a tomb for their relationships. This messy, tear-streaked, laughter-punctuated, honest night was a revival. They had looked at the cracks in their family foundation and, instead of pretending they weren't there, had pointed at them, talked about them, and begun tentatively to plan how to repair them together. The ghosts had been named, and, in the naming, had lost some of their power. The next morning, Boxing Day, dawned with a clean, white light. Catherine was the first up, moving quietly to the kitchen to start the coffee. She was surprised to find Michael already there, dressed, reading something on his laptop at the kitchen island. "You're up early," she said. He looked up, and there was a focus in his eyes she hadn't seen in over a year. Found this accelerated online certification program. Starts in January. Uses real-world case studies. He showed her the screen. It was a practical, sensible plan. The weight of pretending was gone, replaced by the purposeful energy of a man with a path, however modest. "That looks wonderful," she said, meaning it. One by one, the household stirred. William came down and wordlessly poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to his son. Chloe appeared, wrapped in a blanket, her face puffy from sleep and last night's tears, but her eyes clear. "I'm going to look at that studio on Oak Street today," she announced. "The one I told you about. It's tiny, but it has huge windows." The plan had shifted from a distant maybe to an immediate today. The symbolic rent agreement had given her the courage to look forward. Over a simple breakfast of leftovers and toast, the conversation was easy, peppered with jokes and practicalities. The specter of the dinner was gone. In its place was the ordinary, beautiful mess of a family sharing a morning. Later that afternoon, as Michael packed his small bag to drive back to his apartment, he paused in the hallway. He found his father in the living room, reading the paper. "Dad," Michael said. William looked up. "I was thinking maybe next weekend I could come over and help you clean out the gutters. You said they were clogged with fall leaves." It was an olive branch, an offer of contribution of time and sweat instead of money. William's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'd like that. Could use the help." It was a new contract between them, built on partnership, not debt. Chloe, too, before leaving for her apartment viewing, sought out her mother. She found Catherine folding laundry in the guest room. Her room now. "I'll bring my things over tomorrow, if that's okay," Chloe said. "And I was thinking maybe next week, You could come with me to pick out a new sofa bed for in here. Something that's really mine. Catherine put down the towel she was folding. I would love that. It was an invitation into her new, independent life, not a request for a rescue. As Catherine stood at the front window, watching Chloe's taxi pull away and Michael's car disappeared down the street, William came to stand beside her. He slipped an arm around her waist. Well, he sighed a long, contented exhale. That was a Christmas. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was, she agreed. The house was quiet again, but the silence was different. It wasn't the anxious quiet of anticipation or the hollow quiet of performance. It was the full, warm quiet of a house that has been lived in truly and honestly by the people who love it. The air still held the echoes of laughter and tears, the scent of pine and pie, and the profound relief of truth. Catherine thought about the bridge she had been so desperately trying to build. She realized now she hadn't needed to build it alone. They had all, haltingly, fearfully, brought their own materials, their honesty, their wounds, their love, and had met in the middle. The bridge wasn't perfect or finished. Chloe's heart was still mending. Michael's future was still unwritten. But the crossing had been made. They had reached each other. And that, she knew, looking at the Christmas tree now in the soft afternoon light, was the only gift that ever really mattered. It wasn't a picture-perfect ending, but a true, real-life beginning. They were a family, not in spite of their cracks, but with a new understanding of how to hold each other together within them. The dinner was over, but the meal, in all its messy, nourishing glory, had finally been served.